Right now, there's a nuclear showdown in Iran. And it just so happens that that's the name of a DVD produced by today's guest. And today's guest is author Bill Salus. Bill, welcome back to Prophecy Watchers.
Gary, thanks for having me on your program.
You know, when you put together nuclear showdown in Iran, did you have any idea that things would proceed in the direction that they have proceeded in?
Well, I did. I felt that that was a prophecy dealing with the issues of today, especially with Iran's nuclear program that had been vastly overlooked. And so what I wanted to do was really explore that and see if it was a prophecy that was for our time or had already been historically fulfilled. You know, it's only 6 verses in Jeremiah chapter 49, verses 34 through 39, but boy, are they potent and powerful and timely.
They really are. We're going to talk today about a timeline. We believe we're living in the last days, and we believe that perhaps the crucial date of the 20th century was the date of the founding of the State of Israel, May 14th, 1948. And that really was a significant time point. It's almost as though we're moving rapidly along some kind of a line right now. And today we're going to be talking about that timeline. How close are we, Bill? And let's just start with that question and branch out from there.
Well, I concur. Israel is the centerpiece, really, of the end times. And where this is heading is a point in time where God is going to put the world on notice that he's a holy, loving, promise-keeping God. And that's going to be in this event called Ezekiel 38 and 39. You know, Ezekiel 38 and 39 is 52 verses of some of the most descriptive prophecies in the entire Bible compacted into those 2 chapters. We find out who's going to be involved, what participants, what their motive is. We find out what's going to happen, how they're going to be defeated in this invasion against Israel. We find out what's going to happen in the aftermath, the mop-up, and what we find out in the middle of it, after this massive invasion is stopped by God, not by America or not by the Israeli Defense Forces, we find out that he's going to then be able to say, and he says, I will uphold my holy name in the midst of my people Israel. They shall not profane it anymore, and the nations shall know I'm the Lord. And that is what's so critical right now in the timeline. This is where it's heading. God is going to let the world know he is a God they can put their faith in. He's a covenant-keeping God. It required there to be an Israel and Israelis because they are the chosen people from the Old Testament when God made his unconditional covenant with Abraham and the promised land of Israel. God promised Abraham he would have descendants forever and that they would have a land forever. And that was an unconditional covenant. And God is going to restore the faith of this world if they'll just put their trust in him by upholding his holy name in the midst of his people Israel. And that's where we're headed. And I think it's near, but is it next?
Now, I think Bible prophecy has focused on really 2 events for as long as I've been studying it. One is Israel coming together, coming back into the land in the latter days. The other, Israel being attacked by Gog, whom many identify as Russia or a Russian confederation. And for years, and I don't know how many years you go back, Bill, but I go back too many to recount, I think. And for years, I've been hearing about the Russian attack on Israel from the north. It's sort of the dogma, you know. And nobody has really put together a kind of an unfolding timeline that would lead up to, with a series of developing events that would lead up to the actual invasion of Israel by Gog. And I think that one of the things you've done and done very well is to kind of put that timeline together. There are things that are going to happen before Russia invades Israel. So let's talk about some of those and how they fit on this timeline we're talking about.
I agree. You know, that event of Ezekiel 38 and 39 where Russia puts together a coalition of 9, and we know Iran's in there under the banner of Persia, Turkey's in there, and the other countries, and they are going to come against Israel, and we know that is a really big deal, and that is the event God's going to uphold his holy name in. But we have so many details in there that I think in many ways have been overlooked that we have to put into the thinking here of our end times model. That Israel is well described also. It's an Israel that's brought in the latter years, brought out of the nations after being persecuted into a land that had long been desolate. And we know that that Israel exists today, but it doesn't stop there, Gary. More descriptions. It's dwelling securely in the midst of the land, without walls, bars, nor gates, in receipt of acquired livestock and goods, gold, because it's a very prosperous Israel, and that's what entices Russia to lead this coalition into Israel, because they want to take this great plunder. And I split hairs with some people, and I say, look, that Israel only in part exists today. They are not dwelling securely. They are surrounded by enemies that want to wipe them off the map, that don't recognize Israel's right to exist. They happen to be in their own prophecy of Psalm 83. You know, it's interesting when you look at the Russian consortia of nations, none of them share common borders with Israel, and none of them have been Israel's historic enemies throughout time. They will be Israel's enemies. They will come against Israel. But the historic enemies that share common borders with Israel, they're in Psalm 83. And Israel cannot dwell securely because of them. And so I think we've got to look at, you know, when will Israel dwell securely and be in that wealthy condition that Russia now will come after that Israel? And that's what I'm looking at.
Now, to review just a little bit, and for some of you who may not be familiar, Psalm 83 is a prayer. It's a prayer that's delivered by Asaph, who is a prophet, who's a seer. And Asaph is praying that God will destroy Israel's enemies, just as he did in the days of the Midianites. So basically, that is the thrust. And you have a number of enemies: Edom, the Ishmaelites, Moab, the Hagarenes. There's a long list of enemies who have sworn to cut Israel off from being a nation. Psalm 83 is a prayer, and I think God answers that prayer. He does indeed destroy the enemies of Israel, just as the Midianites were destroyed back in the days of Gideon. Mm-hmm. And I can't wait to see it personally. Yeah. But let's put this event now of Psalm 83 on some kind of a timeline so that people can really understand how this fits into the progression of what you believe is going to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, we're told when Israel will dwell securely, as mentioned in Ezekiel 38, by Ezekiel himself in chapter 28. He says they will dwell securely when judgments are executed upon those around them who despise them. That's in Ezekiel chapter 8, toward the end of the chapter. And those around them that despise them happen to be Israel's historic enemies, and they are the ones sharing common borders with Israel, with Lebanon to the north, Syria, Iraq, Saudi Arabia. I think all these are identified in there, perhaps even Egypt, Jordan. And of course, inside of those now, you have the terrorist populations of Hezbollah, Hamas. You got the Palestinians. I think they're inside of Psalm 83. The Palestinian refugees, I think they're identified as the tents of Edom. But you know, the big issue now is ISIS. ISIS now is in those areas as well. And if they go unchecked, they're going to be a really big issue, and they may be very much a part of Psalm 83. And you mentioned the Midianites, how they were destroyed.
Right.
Asaph, the one who authored Psalm 83 3,000 years ago, who we are told is a prophet also in 2 Chronicles 29, verse 30, he talks about Assyria. He talks about the Midianites, how he would like God to deal with them. He actually uses the example of the Midianites with Gideon. So I think we're in a situation where we have real-time application, and we've seen this unfolding. We saw the nations that are listed in Psalm 83 come against Israel in 1948. They rejected their being in Israel at the United Nations. In 1947, they voted against it. They don't recognize Israel's right to exist today. They fought against them again, some of them in 1967, 1973. But the issue has not gone away. And when Asaph said, petition, deal with them like you did with the Midianites, once Gideon dealt with the Midianites, where he took his 300-man army, and with the help of the tribe of Ephraim, and this is in the book of Judges, they got rid of 120,000 Midianites, and the Midianites never oppressed Israel again, and that's the key.
300 against 120,000, by the way. That's overwhelming odds. And that suggests that the same thing is going to happen today. In other words, Israel is going to be victorious over or against overwhelming odds. And again, what we're talking about here is not Ezekiel 38.
No.
Let's go on then and put this timeline together.
Okay. Well, I think Psalm 83 has to happen so that Israel can dwell securely. And when Israel dwells securely, Ezekiel 38 can happen. And when Ezekiel 38 happens, God defeats that through fire, hailstone, and brimstone, and he upholds his holy name in the midst of his people Israel. And so we're heading in that direction, but until they dwell securely, Ezekiel 38 only draws near, but is not next, in my estimation.
Wow. And the question's rotating in my mind, and I'm sure in yours right now. We've got to be close to something. Going back to 1948, State of Israel, moving forward, 1967, the Six-Day War, moving forward through the 70s, the 80s. I can remember the prophecy studies that were being done in the 70s. Hal Lindsey, the late great Planet Earth, in 1970. People have been watching and trying to understand this whole thing for decades. And there's now the feeling that we're getting really, really close. So let's talk about that timeline.
Well, I think because we go from if you had two bookends here, and Rebirth of Israel is the left bookend and the right bookend for, as far as we're concerned, we're on the timeline. Certainly things happen after Ezekiel 38, tribulation, Antichrist, judgments in the book of Revelation, etc. But we're talking to your audience right now about where are we on the timeline, therefore what prophetic information is most relevant to us. And so what I'm looking at is, because Ezekiel 38, that right bookend is looking really near, I'm also now thinking, okay, here are the things that I believe are going to precede. We are 67 years from the rebirth of the nation of Israel. We are marching toward who knows how soon till Ezekiel 38. Is it months? Is it a few years? I don't think it's 67 more years. I think we're going to have Psalm 83. I think we're going to have the destruction of Damascus in Isaiah 17. I think we're going to have the prophecy of the nuclear showdown in Elam in Jeremiah 49. I think we're going to see the decline of America, all in this little window period of time leading up to Ezekiel 38. And I'm also watching for the big deal, the rapture of the church. That may even be in this little gap of time between where we are now in 2015 as we sit here until the fulfillment of Ezekiel 38, which is drawing near. We have got a lot of things that are going to happen, and boy, Gary, these are big, powerful, global impacting events.
They really are. And you're stimulating my imagination. There's so many things going through my mind. Let's talk about Isaiah 17, because, Bill, as we speak, Syria, Bashar al-Assad, is shrinking away. He's tried everything he can do to preserve Syria under his dictatorship, no other way to put it. And bit by bit by bit, the Bashar al-Assad dictatorship is being worn away. Some people have even expressed the idea that Syria no longer exists except as a figment of Assad's imagination. And the powers that surround Syria are growing and growing. Where's this going?
Well, they are, and they're going to have to redefine the map of Syria and maybe even take Syria as a name off of it eventually.
That's Isaiah 17. Damascus.
Well, this is the issue. Now, right now, when you look at modern day Syria, they've been in this revolution now since March of 2011, and in the midst of that period of time, ISIS has moved in and taken over areas in northern Syria and in northern Iraq. Matter of fact, the territories they've taken over much resemble ancient Assyria at the time Psalm 83 was written. And so what we've got right now is Syria is in a serious amount of trouble. And Isaiah 17 talks about a day that would come, in verse 1, where it says, Damascus will cease from being a city, it will be a ruinous heap. It will, the oldest continuously inhabited city in recorded history dating back to the time of Abraham, which is the capital of Syria, which is in shambles right now because of the revolution. Someday it will cease to exist. And we're given further descriptions in Isaiah 17, verse 9, that it will be a desolation because of the children of Israel. So it looks like the Israeli Defense Forces are involved in the actual destruction of Syria, Damascus in particular. But in verse 14, as Isaiah concludes, he says, at eventide you see Damascus, but in the morning he is no more, speaking of Damascus in the masculine pronoun.
Modern weapons of some sort would be.
Yeah, by Israel. See, And as you read the entire prophecy of Isaiah 17, it's only 14 verses, you see that it's not Israel as an aggressor, but Israel as a defender of its existence. So we've got a prophecy that is very powerful, this cessation of a city. And Israel would have to take out Damascus if all of a sudden they're being cornered in with Hezbollah lobbing missiles in. Estimates are Hezbollah could lob in 1,500 missiles a day. And in the first week of another war with Hezbollah, you could have literally 4,000 casualties of Israelis. That's how serious we're talking about. And so Israel has to, now they're involved in a fight that there's no rules, there's no holds barred, and a nuclear weapon will probably come out of Israel's arsenal.
Now, a nuclear weapon, perhaps even aimed at Damascus.
Yeah, and you know what? They've got skills now of learning where to detonate that, the fire burst mile in altitude. So if you, for instance, an electromagnetic pulse is a nuclear weapon in EMP. If you launch it up 180 miles, a burst altitude of 180 miles, it spreads out like a canopy at the speed of light and fries the electronics underneath it. But a detonation about 40 miles above a city will come down and destroy that area, but won't suck up all the particles and make it nuclear contamination as bad as it was like in Hiroshima, which bursted down on the ground and sucked up into the mushroom cloud, all that. Now, I'm not a physicist or a nuclear weapons, but what I do understand is that Israel knows where to burst altitude something without, because Israel's real close. Tel Aviv's not far from Damascus, so they've got to be real careful. But at the same token, Israel's in a corner right now, Gary. You know that. They've got to do something.
Now, you're talking about a nuclear showdown in Iran. You're talking about ISIS moving forward. You're talking about Israel perhaps being forced to use nuclear weapons. And all of this happens, and still Ezekiel 38 hasn't happened. You're suggesting that in this, Israel emerges victorious in the battles we've been talking about.
Well, yes, after Psalm 83 and Isaiah 17, they can now start to dwell securely. I believe they can expand their borders, and I point out in the DVDs and things that you've got here how I do believe that there's scriptures that support that. I believe Israel will expand territorially incrementally. I don't believe they're going to get all of the promised land, which is from the river of Egypt to the river Euphrates, what's commonly called the Levant today, the promised land. But we know that when they win wars, they expand territorially. Joshua did it 3,500 years ago. King David did it about 3,000 years ago, and Israel did it in 1967. So I think we're looking at a situation where you're not only going to see redrawing the maps of Syria, but redrawing the whole maps of the Middle East, which were redrawn in the after the Ottoman Empire collapsed. We're going to see, I think, a new atlas is coming out here in the near future.
I don't want to let that last point go by without emphasizing 1967, which you just mentioned. Nobody would have predicted that Israel would win that battle in 1967. It looked like Israel was sunk. And the Six-Day War was essentially, going back to that time, it was a miracle of God.
It was. Israel's existence today is a miracle of God. They should never have survived 1948, the War of Independence against the Arab states, which happened to be the members of Psalm 83. So, this is what I think is important for the audience to know. The existence of Israel today fulfills many Bible prophecies. It is a miracle of God. His fingerprints are conspicuously all over the existence and preservation of Israel. It is not existing because it's a UN moral obligation after the Holocaust. So be clear on this and study those Bible prophecies. Israel exists in fulfillment of prophecy because God is going to uphold his holy name in the midst of his people Israel. And that's what we're looking at.
Now, let's talk about the timeline once again. We go back to Israel, 1948. Move forward, let's say to 9/11, which was an attack on U.S. soil, no doubt about it. From 9/11 to the present, we're on a rapidly moving timeline. We've had an incredible series of attacks launched against the United States proper, and I think miraculously they've all been averted up to this point. But people are talking about everything from as you mentioned a minute ago, a nuclear explosion that would knock out our power grid. You're talking about coordinated internal attacks by ISIS confederates, sleeper cells here in the United States. We're in this picture in ways that we'd rather not be right now.
Right. Not only as we are concerned about the current events in the news and how things are shaping up, but I believe we're also in biblical prophecy and in Ezekiel 38. There's a strong possibility that we're mentioned in Ezekiel 38, verse 13.
And that's exactly what I wanted to ask you about.
Yeah.
Let's move into that. That's very interesting. How are we involved?
Well, I think we find ourselves in Ezekiel 38, verse 13, where you've got this list of 4 other populations, Sheba, Dedan. Do you want to read verse 13?
I will. Ezekiel 38:13 says, Sheba and Dedan and the merchants of Tarshish with all the young lions thereof shall say unto thee, Art thou come to take a spoil? Hast thou gathered thy company to take a prey, to carry away silver and gold, take away cattle and goods and great spoil? So here we have Sheba, Dedan, the merchants of Tarshish, and the young lions, 4 groups of people mentioned as a sort of a confederation, I suppose.
Yeah, and that's important to note, because when you study Ezekiel 38, you not only have Israel being victimized by this invasion, you have the 9 coalition members of Russia's invasion, but you've got these other 4 which seem to be protesting or sideline spectators. And Sheba and Dedan, we would suspect maybe Dedan is Saudi Arabia, Sheba is Yemen, and maybe even carrying over into the Arab immigrants and some of the Gulf Cooperative Council states over there. But who is the Tarshish and their young lions, the merchants of Tarshish? And there are 2 main studies of thought on that. One is Tarshish is Spain, and the young lions would be the Latino countries and South America that spread out from that. I find that to be a very weak argument. I've studied it intensely. The more logical argument is that the Tarshish is the UK, and the young lions that came out from that would include America, and when the colonialization process that went on. And here's the situation. If that's us, and we're standing on the sidelines, we're a superpower right now. We're called to be a protector of Israel.
Right.
Why are we sitting there going, what are you doing, Russia, with your massive invasion coming for plunder and booty? That concerns me, Gary. Now, archaeologists and many others in the argument of Tarshish being the UK, they believe it was beyond the Strait of Gibraltar, which you take it over into the Isles. You find Tarshish showing up many times in the Bible, that they were settled in the Isles of Tarshish.
Right.
They were known for their seaworthy ships and and their vast riches. And archaeologists often think that Britain is the former name of Tarshish. And there's evidences in America that Tarshish has been found, engravings and things like that. So I think we're in there, and I'm concerned we're going to decline between now and that Gog and Magog invasion, and I'm starting to see that happen right now.
Exactly. I was about to say, don't we see America drifting in that direction right now, drifting away from being a protectorate of Israel or a protector of Israel, but rather drifting away from that.
We're asking Israel to trade land for peace, which is not biblically endorsed. God is going to have a greater, safer Israel at the point where Ezekiel 38 happens. They're not safe right now, and giving up land, convincing them, twisting their arm to give up land, is not going to make them safe. They're going to be dwelling securely. You know, the concerns with America is that we have taken God out of our culture and our society. We took him out of prayers in 1962, out of the public schools, out of the Bible reading out of the public schools in 63. Roe versus Wade, we legalized abortion in 1973. We have the Supreme Court struck down a key provision in the Defense of Marriage Act, a biblical model of marriage, one man to one should be married to one woman, in 2013. And in 2015, they approved same-sex marriages. These are biblical boundaries that whenever a nation or empire crossed them in the past, like Sodom and Gomorrah or Assyria or the northern kingdom of Israel, they were judged, and they were judged severely. And I think that's why you've got, for instance, on a DVD you've got here with Jonathan Cahn, Mark Biltz, and myself, we're warning Americans. We're warning Americans through harbingers and signs like that, that it's time to get in line with God. There's concerns going on right now.
And speaking of DVDs, which Bill just did, I have 4 DVDs here: Nuclear Showdown in Iran, Psalm 83, America and the Coming Mideast Wars, and this one, Out of the Mouth of Two Witnesses, which contains great interviews, by the way, of Jonathan Cahn, Mark Biltz, and author Bill Salus. And this one you'll find extremely edifying. It has 4 DVDs in it. So you've got a total here of what, 7 DVDs, and we're offering this for $59.95 at the prophecywatchers.com online bookstore. And we're calling it the Nuclear Showdown package, Nuclear Showdown in Iran. When Bill put together this and his book, and how long ago has that been?
Well, the nuclear showdown just came out in 2014 at the end of the summer, and it's more and more relevant even today now with this nuclear deal going on with Iran.
And that has popped right into the news. It's at the top of the news today, and I think it'll stay there for a while because Iran is, let's face it, not backing down from any threat that they have made concerning Israel and even concerning the United States. They're feeling powerful right now. This is the Nuclear Showdown package, 4 DVDs for $59.95. Again, the prophecywatchers.com website has an online bookstore. You click on that, you go right down and find this package, and you will be edified, I promise you. You'll have a lot to think about, and believe me, there is a lot to think about these days because we're close. I should ask, how close are we?
Well, on the timeline we've been talking about as a very powerful event in Ezekiel 38, I think that we are so near to that right now. And like I said, we've got prophecies that are probably going to have to happen before we even get to Ezekiel 38, that we could literally be looking at months, maybe a few years. I do not see it being another 67 years like since the rebirth of Israel. And I believe that when we find the next literal fulfillment of a prophecy, it will segue in and to a prophecy behind that and behind that, and the world will be impacted and changed forever. And I think that's going to happen real soon, Gary. I can't put a date on it, but I'm looking at something very, very soon.
And we don't put dates on anything because the Lord says that no man knows the day or the hour. We believe that. He's arranged it so that we can't second guess what he's doing. On the other hand, Bill, you do believe in a pre-tribulation rapture of the church as imminent. A signless event could happen any moment, and we can't date the rapture, but it certainly seems to be on the next order of things very quickly.
Well, I think as we marched on the timeline toward the fulfillment of Ezekiel 38, when the Lord's going to put the whole world on official notice that he's going to uphold his holy name, I don't know that the church has to be there for that, Gary. I agree with you. Nothing has to happen. The rapture of the church is an imminent event. God is going to come and get his bride without warning in a split second, it says, in the twinkling of an eye. And I have various reasons why I'm not even sure we'll be here for Ezekiel 38. I think the rapture could happen at any given moment because we're not appointed to wrath. God's going to save us from the wrath that's going to come in the tribulation period. We're kept from the hour of trial, we're told in the book of Revelation. We're to comfort one another with these words. So, Gary, I know the key of your ministry is keep watching, keep looking up and that sort of thing. I would encourage the Christians right now that because we're seeing all these things on the horizon, these prophecies coming, that you need to be on the lookout. Do your rapture exercises. Get your hands up in the air because I believe the Lord could come at any moment and take us out of here, Gary.
Well said. Author, lecturer, Bill Salus. And by the way, just keep track of him because wherever he goes and wherever he speaks, he's always got the latest in Bible prophetic news. I'm Gary Stearman. Thanks, Bill, for being here. And by the way, keep watching, everybody. We are. Thanks for joining us on Prophecy Watchers. You can find us on the web at prophecywatchers.com or follow us at facebook.com/prophecywatchers. In the meantime, keep watching, everybody, and we'll see you soon.